Yes, my friends, things are heating up around the Miami Dolphins, and there are three situations we absolutely need to talk about before this preseason game. We know this team still has questions, but some answers are finally starting to appear, and one of them is a huge surprise. Caleb Douglas is making people pay attention. Chop Robinson looks like he could be ready for a breakout season, but at the same time, Miami's secondary is giving Dolphins fans a real reason to worry. And guys, I want to know which side you're on. Which of these three situations will have the biggest impact on the Dolphins this season? Write your answer in the comments. And if you've been a Miami Dolphins fan for more than 15 years, hit that like button hard, because you've been waiting a long time to see this team make a serious run. I want to see the Dolphins fighting for a Super Bowl, and why not believe it can happen? But for that dream to become reality, Miami needs its young players to step up and its biggest weaknesses to improve. So let's start with the player who has become one of the biggest surprises of training camp, Caleb Douglas. There is still plenty of uncertainty surrounding the Miami Dolphins as we get closer to the season, and preseason football will finally give us a chance to see some of these players against another team. But after the first few weeks of training camp and the joint practice with the Washington Commanders, three things are becoming very difficult to ignore, and the first one might be the biggest surprise of them all. Caleb Douglas is making a serious statement. When training camp started, there was optimism around the rookie wide receiver out of Texas Tech. There were positive reports during those first few practices, and that alone was encouraging. But what has happened since then has gone beyond a few nice catches or one good afternoon. Over the last several practices, Douglas has separated himself from the rest of the group. At this point, he looks like Miami's starting Z wide receiver. That is a major development for an offense that entered camp with questions at wide receiver. Malik Washington has been working from the slot, Jalen Tolbert is at the X position, and Douglas has emerged as a player who can make an impact both outside and inside. What makes this even more interesting is the variety of ways Douglas has been producing. He has found success running crossing routes. He has been effective on slants. He has made contested catches when a defender was right there with him. This isn't simply a receiver taking advantage of one particular matchup or doing one thing well. He has consistently been making plays. In fact, Douglas has been described as the best wide receiver in Miami's training camp, and his connection with quarterback Malik Willis has become one of the biggest stories of the summer. From the opening days of camp, whenever Willis faced pressure or needed to make a play in an important situation, he seemed comfortable looking toward Douglas. That connection hasn't disappeared. It has grown stronger. Douglas has been the most targeted wide receiver and has also enjoyed the most success when the ball has gone his way during Miami's inter-squad work and the joint practice against Washington. And that joint practice may have been the moment when everything became impossible to dismiss. Douglas wasn't simply one of Miami's better receivers that day. He was arguably the Dolphins' best offensive player during the practice. Kyle Krabs, who watched the practice in person, noted that Douglas produced several explosive plays throughout one-on-one drills, 7-on-7 work, and team periods. Late in practice, Douglas also made a difficult contested catch over the middle of the field. He kept showing up.
Big play after big play. And perhaps the most encouraging part for Dolphins fans is that people outside Miami were noticing it too. This wasn't just Dolphins reporters, content creators, or fans getting excited about their own player. Even people covering Washington noticed Douglas. One Commander's account identified him as the most impressive player for Miami's offense. When the Dolphins were creating big plays, Douglas repeatedly seemed to be involved. That matters because training camp excitement can sometimes get out of control. Every summer, fans hear about players having great practices. Then preseason begins, the competition changes, tackling becomes real, and suddenly things look different. That is why the next test is so important. The preseason game against Washington gives Douglas an opportunity to take everything we have heard about him and show it in an actual game environment. He gets to put on the full Dolphins uniform and compete against another team with tackling allowed. And it sounds like Miami could play at least some of its starters, which should create opportunities for Douglas to prove that what we've been hearing from training camp can carry over when the environment changes. There is no reason to crown anyone before that happens. But there is absolutely a reason to be excited. A rookie receiver wasn't necessarily the player Dolphins fans expected to emerge as the possible answer at the position this quickly. Yet Douglas has earned attention through his performance. If you're looking for one player to watch closely in the preseason opener, keep your eyes on number 12. Watch where he lines up. Watch how often Willis looks toward him. And most importantly, watch what happens when the football comes his way. Because if Douglas continues doing what he has been doing in practice, Miami may have found something very important. But Douglas isn't the only player creating excitement. On the defensive side, another development could be just as important for the future of this franchise. Chop Robinson looks different. And so far in August, he has been playing like a man who understands exactly how important this season is. Robinson is entering his third year, and this is a massive season for him. Miami will eventually have to make a decision regarding his fifth-year option, so this is the time for Robinson to show that he can become one of the foundation pieces of this defense. Through training camp, he has looked ready for that challenge. Robinson has been one of Miami's best defensive players throughout August, and the performance against Washington gave us another example of his progress. He created pressure. He produced plays that would have been sacks in a normal game situation. He made his presence felt against the run. And one detail about his development deserves attention. Robinson added roughly 10 pounds during the offseason and is now around 265 pounds. That extra size matters because becoming a complete edge defender isn't only about flying around an offensive tackle and chasing the quarterback. You also have to hold your ground. You have to set the edge. You have to deal with blockers who are trying to move you out of the play. And that is an area Robinson has focused on. During the joint practice, he competed against different Washington offensive tackles, including Josh Connolly Jr. and Brandon Coleman, and Robinson made sure people noticed him. He got pressure against Jaden Daniels and was credited with a sack even though quarterbacks obviously weren't being tackled to the ground in that practice setting. He also showed strength against the run. Now, it wasn't perfect. Connolly had wins of his own against Robinson, and that should be mentioned because we're not trying to pretend every rep belonged to Miami. But that's football. Good players are going to win reps against each other. The bigger story is that Robinson continued the strong form he has shown throughout camp. And that could be enormous for Miami. Think about the importance of the edge position on this roster. There are plenty of conversations surrounding wide receiver. There are serious concerns about the secondary, which we'll get to in a moment. But Miami also needs to know who can become its leading pass rusher for years to come. Outside of Robinson, there aren't many major long-term investments at edge. There are players on short-term deals, but there isn't another obvious long-term answer sitting there. That puts even more importance on Robinson's development. If he can prove this season that he is capable of becoming a top-level edge rusher, it would solve a major question for the Dolphins while giving Robinson the breakthrough season he needs. That's why he belongs in the conversation when we talk about the most important players on this roster. Obviously, Malik Willis is incredibly important. Young players such as Chris Johnson, Caden Proctor, and Patrick Paul also have important roles in Miami's future because of the premium positions they play. But Robinson is right there. Miami needs this development to be real. And so far,